And hello and welcome to this week's episode of Media Musings. We started the intro with a moment of silence because, you know, um, we're doing Orlando in honor of Trans Awareness Week, and Trans Awareness Week is centered around November 20th, which is the Trans Day of Remembrance. So I felt it fitting to, start with a moment of silence.
Yeah.
And so welcome to Media Musings, all those who are currently in the chat and lurk. So currently we have Godless Scummer, Julie LaVoice, Hop Swatch, Santi the Sane, Critical Cripple popped in for a brief second. And of course, anyone who's lurking or maybe watching in the future.
Yeah.
Now, it's somewhat fitting that that this panel is covering Orlando because there are no cis people on this panel. But anyways, oh, sorry. I swear it's not COVID.
I want that on a t-shirt. I swear it's not COVID.
Not COVID, yeah.
Sorry, I tried not to crack up, but just your face when you said that.
So, now, before we get into the discussion proper, a couple of disclaimers. So, one, while it is a, it's a good exploration of gender, and funny how most feminist works, or at least the earlier feminist works, are very inclusive of, trans themes. Channel punching bag.
3 minutes, Ring.
Yeah. This, Orlando, a biography, was written in 1926.
Yeah.
So, while it may be ahead of its time in some ways in its exploration of gender, you cannot say the same about its mentions or lack thereof of race.
Oh, no,
no, you
not.
can't.
Yeah.
You also can't necessarily say its concepts for gender and gender identity totally with what we'd have as a modern point of view towards that either, but certainly well in advance of what a lot of people's modern ideas of it are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's as a historical piece of work, it is very forward thinking.
Yeah. But it is still a product of its time. So there are some slurs for Black people in there. The book opens with Orlando cutting down the shrunken head of a Black man and then tying it back to the rafters.
Yeah.
So it's not the most,
the
most racially sensitive book on the planet.
And he
the book
entire chapter where they spend time with travelers, but travelers is not the word that's used.
Yes, because historically the word that is used was the word for travelers, at least from those outside of the traveler community. So it's kind of...
To be fair, the novel does what span 5 centuries, isn't it?
Yeah.
It does. And the thing is, it does use the term for travelers. The thing is, there's also the word that's used for Black people in this is a word, especially in Europe, that's more associated with Spaniards than anything else.
Yeah.
When we talk
at least
about
in the beginning.
Yeah, at least in the beginning. Yeah.
Then it changes to a different word.
Yeah, it does. But in the beginning, the reference is to, and I'm going to say the word because it's not particularly offensive, is to Moors, which if anyone's read Othello, you know what that word is used for in that era. However, there is also a historical precedent for Moors being Spaniards. There's also the term was also applied to some. I'm going to call them native Jamaicans, but that's a bit of a give and take. Essentially, when the British and what have you arrived in Jamaica, the locals that were there fled into the mountains, and occasionally they were known as Moor people as well.
Yeah,
because they were there. They were what you would call, if you like, Aboriginal Jamaica. The terminology is very iffy, but I'm trying to give you an idea. They were there before the British and Americans started bringing Africans and Indians as slaves, and then as workers and indentured servants. So, just the terms got different connotations in different parts of the world, essentially. Also, on that point of order, please. Point of order. Pronouns.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, Virginia Woolf refers to Orlando as he, him throughout, through the first half of the book. And then once Orlando becomes a woman, through the rest of the book, Orlando is she, her.
Yeah. Except occasionally Orlando refers to themselves, when Virginia Woolf is referring to them as she, her, refers to themselves as he, him.
Yeah.
And
so it gets a bit convoluted.
Yeah. And even they is used as a pronoun in certain points in the book as well, because ambiguity also happens.
Yes, there is ambiguity and cross-dressing and all that kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the ambiguity is not just Orlando is the main character. It is throughout the entire book.
I know we're doing Orlando, but I have to say something because I saw this tweet earlier and it amused me. Yeah. In this day and age, the only point of reference young people have for the word drag race is RuPaul. These same young people are still being taught The Outsiders in school. Let that sink in, and how that would all change the way that book is read.
Yeah.
That just amused me.
And so, fun. And while we are discussing Orlando, like I said, a lot of prominent feminist works also feature various, trans-inclusive explorations of genders and themes. Like, for instance, Ursula K. Le Guin's Left-Handed Darkness, which will probably be an episode eventually, but I have to reread it first.
You've read it?
Yeah, in high school.
I went to a Catholic high school. Do you know what the likelihood of me even knowing what that book existed was?
Yeah. And also, hello to Never Again, and we have something of a celebrity in the chat.
Do we?
Dallas Wade.
Ooh.
Dallas Wade.
Hi, Dallas. And Microraptor's there too.
Yeah, yep, and hello to Microraptor.
But yes, as we're on pronouns, second point of order, our pronouns. Because I feel like that's also pertinent information.
Yeah.
Well, mine are definitely she, her.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, today mine is she, her, because you can tell I'm wearing makeup and I look girly, but occasionally it's they, them.
Yeah. Today, he, him's fine, they, them's fine for whenever. Sometimes she, her, but that's kind of rare-ish. Yeah. Like every few months or so, I'll have like a few days or a week where I'm feeling she, her.
Yeah. If you ever hear me refer to my wife, I'm not cheating I'm not cheating. We're not polyamorous. It's the same person. Do you know how many years I've had that on my chest and I've needed to clarify that a few times? Yeah. So cool.
But also, it's not a feminist work, but another work that I'd also suggest reading, but not so much because it's outright about trans themes. It's just it does something very, very interesting and very, very subtly. Is John Scalzi's Locked In, because I'm kind of ruining it by telling you this, but the protagonist's pronouns are never listed. You never find out what gender the protagonist is throughout the entire book.
Yeah, I think there is a isn't there? There's a little bit. Scalzi does make some reference to opportunities for gender reassignment in Dead Man's War as well.
Old Man's War, you mean?
Old Man's War, even, not Dead Man's War. Yeah. Old Man's War. Because if you've read that one, they do actually. I think there's a bit where they get an option of which they want.
Yeah, it's probably while signing up for the military, because everyone gets a new young body.
Yeah, so they basically get implanted in a new body. So.
Yeah, sometime in the future we need to talk Scalzi, because yes, I have a lot of geeking out to do about Scalzi.
You're not going to need co-hosts for that. We'll just let you go.
Yeah. Oh no, I still need someone to bounce off of. You see me try to stream by myself. I'm a complete wreck.
You're not a complete wreck. You're a puppy god.
But anyways,
there's nothing wrong with you doing streams on your own, Ring.
Yeah,
you're pretty good at it.
You've got some background people, Jen.
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
Cool. As long as they're okay with.
I'm not at home. Yeah, no, they're fine.
So, but anyways. Introductions aside, I will say, because we want to keep the stream as positive as possible, so I'll get all the negative stuff out of the way first. So while I did enjoy Orlando, I do have problems with it. Most of my problems are actually, just it being a product of its time. So I can set that aside because that's, the era. Another big problem is more of a personal taste thing. Yeah. Because in the words of the great literary critic, Gordon Ramsay, this prose is so fucking purple, only the Emperor can wear it.
It is so flowery.
It is so convoluted.
Just...
Yeah.
It is.
It is incredibly convoluted. Like, there's one bit, where is it? There's one quote that actually has a dig at itself for being convoluted.
Yeah.
It's in chapter 2, and there's a quote, because I took note of it. It says, I'm not going to read the whole sentence because it goes on forever, but halfway through the sentence, nature, who has so much to answer for besides perhaps the unwieldy length of this sentence, has further complicated our task and added to our confusion by providing a perfect ragbag of odds and ends within us.
Yeah.
It does it later too, because there's the whole bit where Orlando is actually struggling with whether the airy language is the correct language to use, or should I be more simplistic?
Yeah.
When Orlando's struggling about between prose and poetry.
Yeah.
Which was a metaphor for the struggle between Orlando's identity. So.
Because 19th century literary tropes.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Life imitates art, imitates life.
Well, also, during the portions that take place during the 18th century, Virginia does have some digs at the overly wordy nature of Victorian literature.
Yeah. Intertextual meta-analysis and criticism is a thing in 19th century literature.
Yeah.
Because 19th century literature.
Okay, so purple prose is it's overly flowery and overly wordy style, basically.
Yeah. The Oxford Dictionary has got it as prose that is too elaborate or ornate. Emphasis on the two. Yeah. If you've ever heard of the great internet meme, and I'm convinced troll that was my immortal fan fiction, that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very
wordy.
It's what happens when narrators go too far up their own colon trying to find the right expressions.
Yeah. Now
10 words when one will do, mountain out of a molehill, all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a thing of trying to, I mean, it's normal in poetry, but when you do it in prose, you're going a bit over the top. But I think the point of that was, I mean, Orlando saw themselves as a poet.
Yeah.
So to make the language flowery was part of the style of the book. I've read some of Virginia Woolf's other stuff, and it's not all as flowery as Orlando is.
Yeah.
Just kind of feel like Virginia Woolf sat down with a thesaurus a little bit.
Certainly.
Can you put Microraptor's comment on the screen, please? Because I want to say something about this.
Which
the most recent one. There are two people in this stream who are dyslexic, Microraptor. We are well aware that the word intertextuality is annoyingly similar to the word intersexuality.
The point that I read that it's the same word when I read that.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
I was like, what are they on about?
Now, I do have another issue, but the thing is, I'm not sure. So, should I bring it up now? Because it is part of the discussion of the plot. So should I bring it up now, or should I bring it up when we get to that? When we get to it?
Because I don't know. Are we going to go through the book? We have to go through the book in its two halves. But are we going to go through the book as?
I think a chronological discussion is the best.
Possibly, yeah.
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 All right. We'll maybe leave it till we get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was just not for poets and writers.
Yeah.
Definitely not for poets.
Yeah. So, anyways, it opens up with the young Orlando, like I said, desecrating the shrunken head of a black man.
Yeah.
Which is a problem. But
it's also very open about what the main line of the story is going to be about, because it openly states there he is. He was very definitely a man.
Yeah.
And then puts it all out. And then in the flowery language that it uses to describe him, you could say, yeah, you're saying he's definitely a man, but you're also saying that's somewhat ambiguous too.
Yeah. I think a lot of it as well, this book is more an exploration of the social implications of what gender is.
Yeah.
Rather than gender identity.
Yeah.
It's more a statement of more a statement of gender norms than about gender identity.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So the impressions, which is what it's important about when you look at the historical element behind it. In that Virginia Woolf was greatly influenced by her friend, who parts of her life actually are echoed in the book. I mean, not entirely, because this is hugely fictional, but I mean some of those concepts, because I mean her friend, and what was her name again? Vita Sackville West.
Mm-hmm.
If she was identifying herself today, would probably have identified herself as being gender fluid. I mean, although she got married to a man, she was definitely bisexual. She presented as both a man and a woman in life, and actually wanted to be addressed either way, depending on how she was feeling. Very
much. Hey, it me.
Very much definitely a gender fluid person, and it was exploring this concept of this friend and lover that Virginia Woolf had at one point. That she came up with the storyline for Orlando. So Virginia Woolf was very aware of that sort of thing as well.
So does that make Byron Virginia Woolf's self-insert?
Oh, that's an interesting. Oh,
because Byron has Orlando.
Yeah,
both is good.
Both writing.
Yeah.
Stories. Ooh. The kind of friend that you get buried next to after traveling around the world forever together, and your headstone reads that you were classmates, Microraptor. That kind of friend.
Yeah.
Friend or friend? Both.
Yeah.
Both is good.
Both.
I mean,
also, yes, I ship those two.
I love that that insertion of all these other literary figures throughout the book, and in much the same way as Orlando, unlike the rest of the population, they never really grow old or die. They're just still around.
They just sit there.
Yeah.
It's a really nice commentary on how literature survives its creator.
Yeah.
It is.
And how, we remember people who produce great works of literature and poetry.
Yeah. So, but anyways, it starts with Orlando as a youth.
16, I think.
Yeah.
16.
I think it says 16, but I don't know. The behavior to me strikes me as someone much younger, especially right at the start.
Yeah.
When I read it, I sort of had a mental image of again, apologies for the language that's about to come out of my mouth. Warning. Kind of, it's more like 6 and 7 year olds playing cowboys and Indians. It had that kind of vibe to it.
Though it kind of makes the bit with the Rose Bowl creepier creepier the younger Orlando is.
Yeah, except the time jumps and the aging of Orlando is kind of weird.
Yeah.
Because you can have this discussion that this is happening now and it's on the same day, but really it's not.
Yeah.
Because the chronology of the stories not consistent.
Yes.
Creepiness due to the age of the protagonist. Get your banner button ready. Because 19th century literary tropes.
Although, I mean, to be fair, as a 16-year-old, would they have even cared about that age difference?
Well, no. The thing is, 16, it's understandable for the time. But if we're talking like 10 or 12, we're getting into creepy territory.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to understand that the age of consent in the UK and pretty much in various parts of Europe hovers around 16. There's very few countries that are older than that.
Yeah.
When Virginia Woolf wrote this, it would have been even older.
Would there even have been a codified age of consent at that age? We're talking about an era where, because this was written in what year did you say?
Like 1926, 1929. Hold on.
So they may have had it codified because I know the Victorians codified it at 16 in the UK.
Yeah, it was published in 28. So
the text is based in what, like the parts of it are based in sort of the 1500s.
1500s through to about the
and we're talking
the date she was at, so she sets it up until about the 1930s.
Okay, and
into the future. So.
Yeah, and so 1500s, TMI warning, trigger warning for womby things and uterus things. We're talking about an era where 1500s, you're getting young, assigned female at birth. The minute they get their first period, they're on the wedding market.
Yeah.
And if you're getting your first quote bleed at 11, that's when you're getting married, sweetheart. Deal with it.
Yeah.
That's when you're being put on the wedding market. That's when your parents are taking you out of these girly loose dresses and buying you stuff that's more form fitted and taking you to church for the men to look at. And that's when you're starting to pledge your troth and you're waiting for a husband. Now, Some parents were better and would say, okay, you've got to wait until you're 13 or 15 before you live with your husband in marriage. Or there were arrangements made to say, well, she's too small, she's too young to be pregnant. But that was very subjective and very much based on marriage at that point for, I'm going to say girls at that age.
Yeah.
That was an agreement between father and suitor. She had very little say in the matter unless her father really was, you know, pretty progressive for his time. So, damn it, Microraptor.
Yeah, damn it, Microraptor.
I mean, in all seriousness, in the 1500s, Orlando would have been probably already eyeing off somebody to be married to at that.
Yeah, I mean, you would not expect a young assigned female at birth in the 1500s to not have had male. At least, assigned male.
Male.
Well, I mean, assigned male probably a little bit more freedom because assigned male would have been married a little bit older after military service, etc., and would have had more of their own. Depending on how upper class they were, would have had a bit more wiggle room on their decision.
Yeah.
So, depending on if their father was alive, how much money they had, if they could pay a dowry, all these things played a part. But girls definitely at that time, nope. And as Julie's just put in the chat, I'm going to let you put that up and read it, Rinks. I don't think I can.
Yeah. So, in the U.S. at that time being the 19th century, a girl could legally marry at age 10.
Yeah.
Oh.
So we're not talking about the most enlightened times for allowing young people to grow into their sexuality organically.
And of course, that whole bit about military service doesn't really matter as much because Queen Bess, the Virgin Queen, takes a liking to Orlando.
Oh yeah.
Yes, the Virgin Queen who seems to be dicked by every man in her court.
Yeah.
And who's predatory.
Yes.
Very predatory. And there are rumors that there were various. That bit of the story, there is a rumor that the so-called Virgin Queen did have a bit of a thing with one of her advisors.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if it's not based a bit off that because it's got.
Because Orlando is a bit Forrest Gumpy.
Yeah, that's a fair statement.
Yeah.
Yeah, Queen Bess is Queen Elizabeth the First Microraptor. Yeah. Virgin Queen. And Anne Boleyn's daughter. Mary was Catherine's daughter. Elizabeth was Anne's daughter. Mary was Catholic. Elizabeth was Protestant. Elizabeth I was Anne Boleyn's daughter to Henry VIII.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not very explicit, save for a scene during the celebration after the defeat of the Spanish Armada.
Yeah.
I like the fact that she's not particularly well described, even though she's central to the start of the book, because Orlando doesn't look at her.
Yeah. Plus, I need to know more about Virginia Woolf. Is Virginia Woolf an American? I should know if Virginia Woolf is American or not.
Yeah, you should.
Can you tell I was an English writer. Methinks the lady may perhaps not have been such a royalist.
I'd say not.
I've just realised as well. I read a room of one's own as a.
She was an ardent feminist and against the establishment, so.
Yeah, very anti-establishment. I'm just looking through her list of books, and I read several of these as a teenager, and that probably explains a lot about me.
But
I don't remember most of them.
You will agree with what I said. A lot of her other books aren't as flowery as this.
Oh yeah, like A Room of One's Own, and I mean, A Room of One's Own is the famous one that gets a lot of airtime in classrooms.
Yeah.
And some of the short stories are very good. They're not. Virginia Woolf, quite the pioneer of stream of consciousness narrative.
Oh, definitely.
So I think this is in reference to having read Virginia Woolf.
To be fair, not so much for me looking at that list of books. A lot of those books, I recognize the titles or the covers, but I didn't realize they were Virginia Woolf, which again probably explains a lot about me.
Yeah. But anyways, so Orlando spends the first chunk of their life because each chapter covers a sizable chunk of their life.
Yeah. Okay, I think we can stick to he for at least the first three chapters.
Yeah, 3 chapters. Spends the first chunk of his life as Queen Elizabeth's boy toy.
Yeah,
and
with a lot of power and lands and money going his way.
Yeah, and
very not quite nymphs in the garden for the pliant king, but
yeah. I see what you did there.
Yes, that's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
Well, there's a strong suggestion in the book that Virginia Woolf is suggesting that Elizabeth I might have been a little bit gay herself.
No, Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, much like Lord Byron, who will appear later.
Yeah.
I think Pope, but don't quote me on it. Obviously, Byron is known for a dalliance with another famous gentleman of the era. They were all what is, in polite society, still, so if you ever see this term, you will now know what it means, described as confirmed bachelors. So if you ever read that in an obituary, that doesn't mean that he just liked to live on his own and be a bit of a slob and leave his socks on the floor. It's a very specific comment that's been made.
Yeah.
Usually, if someone is a confirmed bachelor who is very close friends with or was the close companion of, basically, gay dude and his boyfriend, or gay dude and his life partner. That's what that's talking about. But polite society is very prudish.
I mean, if you look into the way that Queen Bess describes Orlando, it got sexy legs.
Virginia Woolf goes on and on, like seriously, up until
Woolf got a leg thing.
Yeah. For the first 3/4 of the book, like every few pages is a mention of how hot Orlando's legs are.
Yeah. Also, that reminded me so much. Okay, so personal anecdote time, because I want to watch Ring blushes. He remembers this. When Ring first met my parents, he came to the UK and met them. My mum was a big feeder. She liked to cook for people. And she'd been asking, what do you eat? And Ring says chicken, typical American white person response.
Did you say fried as well?
No, he just said chicken. And the way she greeted him on going to serve him his first meal in the UK was to ask, so Ring, obviously she used his name, but so Ring, are you a leg or a breast man? And he did not know where to put his response was perfect. He responded with, I prefer the dark meat. Which was just... it's one of those stories, isn't it?
Your response, though, would have been, no, I prefer legs.
Not No, because then her follow-up question would have been, so what are you doing with my daughter?
Oh.
Because that was my mum all over.
Yeah.
So yeah, just a little personal anecdote that book reminded me of, because legs.
Yeah.
It's like legs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Though, if I remember right, you have thoughts or two about my legs.
Your legs are very nice. They're not mentioned 3 times every page for 3 chapters nice, but they are very nice.
So the question then has to be asked: Did Vito have really nice legs because Virginia Woolf?
Yeah.
I mean, possibly wasn't this Vita some kind of actress or dancer, something like that?
Now I can't remember.
But
because I feel like Virginia Woolf definitely has a thing for dancers. I just got that vibe.
And while
she was an author as well and a garden designer.
There you go. Very nice legs.
Yeah. And while and so unfortunately Elizabeth catches Orlando screwing around with one of the maids and becomes jealous.
Doesn't she?
Do you know what happens when Queen Elizabeth I gets jealous of you? Orlando, you were lucky to have survived to the end of the book.
Yeah.
I know. Orlando doesn't.
Elizabeth I was very jealous of Mary, Queen of Scots. Look how that turned out.
Oh, yeah. Although she wasn't as jealous when it was Orlando fraternizing with other people who were of Orlando station. It was more the fact. It was also the fact that it was somebody considered lower.
No.
As well.
Orlando was her bit of rough because there was this concept, and I think there's some cultures that still ascribe it. In that era, there was a concept of, and again, trigger warning for terms and things. The concept of incest was a lot more broad than what we would define it as. So incest was if two brothers had sex with the same person with a vagina. Two people with penises have sex with the same person with a vagina. That's classed as incest. Under Catholic doctrine, and I also think under the Protestant doctrine of the time. Now, it's so for essentially what it is, they're basically saying sex by proxy. If I've had sex with you and you go have sex with a commoner, that means I've had sex with a commoner.
And you're talking about doing that to the
and we're
Queen.
Talking about the Queen.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the Queen, who is the daughter of Henry VIII.
Yeah.
The man who very much enjoyed his beheadings.
Yeah.
So Orlando was very well, considering what also happened after that. It was incredibly lucky to have been alive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think after that, Orlando spends a lot of time hanging in the seedier sides of town with sailors and whores sleeping amongst the treasure ships.
Yes.
Yeah.
We strongly suggested that Orlando never, either the beginning or the end of the book, cared what the gender of their sex partner.
Yeah. Let's be honest. Any hole's a goal.
Yeah.
That's Orlando.
Explicitly said in the second half of the book, but strongly hinted in the first.
Yeah.
Orlando didn't care.
Yeah. And I wonder how much of that the Queen.
Orlando survived by getting away from court.
Orlando did, in the great tradition of people who've pissed off royalty. Orlando jumped ship. That's how that went down.
So. Consistently and over again.
Yes. This is more of a grand tour book than anything else, I think.
It kind of is, isn't it? Because, of course, I mean, after the commoner, it's Sasha.
Yeah.
And as Never Again said, they did a runner, Midnight Flip. I'm sure everyone's heard of a Midnight Flip. Yeah.
But, so eventually, Orlando gets sick of quote unquote sleeping rough.
I will say as well, Microraptor has asked maybe best if Henry VIII liked to remove head, maybe best like to give. In that case, she would definitely be her mother's daughter, because her mother was quite famous for her French, for what she learned in the French court before she came to the English court.
Yeah.
She had a French Revolution.
There was a bit of a French Revolution in Henry VIII's court, yes.
Yeah. So, by the time Orlando returns to the court, King James is on the throne.
Jimmy!
And there's the Big Frost.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the famous winter where the Thames froze over.
Yeah.
I love the description of it, because they basically say in the book it's almost like it's magical and it happens overnight, which obviously didn't happen.
But no, it was. There's a lot of descriptions of that winter and the Thames freezing over and the fair that was held on it, and they're all to man and woman in Virginia Woolf's case. Describe it as like something from another world. A lot of them draw parallels with sort of fairies and fairy realms. It looked like
it was magic.
It's a classic Christmas scene, Christmas storybook. Gentle snowflakes and sparkly skies and glitter and lights, and there's just so much of it, and it's absolutely beautiful. If you ever find any description of it, it's worth reading. And if it seems like purple prose, this is the one point I can forgive Virginia Woolf for this.
Yeah.
No one writes about that winter without purple prose.
Yeah.
She definitely did that. But she also went through all the mythology of it too, like people saying, people froze so quickly that they turned to dust and things like those descriptions actually were made at the time. I mean, of course it never happened, but
the woman frozen in the river with the bundle of apples.
Point of historical order for Microraptor. That was why Catherine's marriage to Arthur had to be annulled, and the message was put out that she never actually slept with Arthur because his health was so bad.
And
otherwise it would have been unthinkable to the Catholic Church.
It's also the loophole that Henry tried to dive through to get his divorce from to get his divorce with Catherine of Aragon.
Yeah.
With from the Pope before he said fuck it and started his own church.
Yeah, he tried to claim that she'd lied and said she'd slept with Arthur when she hadn't slept with Arthur when she had, and he tried to claim she hadn't been a virgin on his wedding night to her. And they brought out like sheets covered in chicken's blood and all kinds of typical that era thing. And then with Anne of Cleves, his marriage to Anne of Cleves was annulled because they never consummated the marriage. So she's technically counted as a divorce, but under canon law they were never married because they never consummated the marriage. Supposedly. And Henry VIII, but at the time he had a nasty, gory abscess on his leg, and apparently he didn't like the way she looked. He called her a horse and all the rest of it. The artist who painted her, Henry VIII's artist who'd gone to Germany to meet her, nearly lost his head over that because apparently he made her look too beautiful in the portrait. And Henry VIII always referred to her as his sister. And he put her up in a house and he gave her a household and a stipend and all the rest of it. And they were, as far as we can tell, she was probably the only woman in his life who he treated with anything like respect for any length of time. So obviously the way to Henry VIII's heart is not to open your legs. Or, give him a son, that also works, but you might die in the process.
His anaconda don't want none unless you birth son.
Yeah.
Oh.
The official witnesses, there were official witnesses in the era of Henry VIII, I think they started doing away with that. I mean, there's the stories of official witnesses to consummations right up until Victorian times when they got really prudish about it. But official witnesses is not what it sounds. It would literally be, yes, it was Hans Holbein Scummer. Thanks for the name drop. So official witnesses would have been put on the bed, literally carried there sometimes, depending on the party. Placed on the bed, it would have been the initial penetration to prove consummation, and then everyone clears out and listens at the doorway. And Microraptor, yes, they use the sheets as evidence because presumably a virgin woman will bleed, and they kept the sheets. It was a well-known thing. They would keep the sheets for years and years and years. And for decades, sometimes they would store them because that was proof that she was a virgin on her wedding night. And if they ever came to a dispute, her dowry could be in question if she couldn't prove she'd been a virgin on a wedding night. Now, obviously, not every woman bleeds, so it was quite common for people to just use chicken blood.
On top of that, the number of women who break their hymen before having sex due to doing other things, it's quite high.
Yep.
So,
but anyways, so and of course, King James sets up the famous Frost Fair on the River Thames.
Mm.
And Orlando catches eyes on a figure from with the Russian embassy.
And then we have,
and has a brief moment of, holy shit, I might be gay.
Excuse me, brief?
Yeah.
Brief? Would you like to rephrase that?
Okay, a brief moment that has been stretched out over several pages because of the fucking purple prose.
I mean, let's be honest. It was hinted at before them anyway. So why this should be a shock to Orlando is beyond me.
Yeah.
I think that's the point Orlando realizes, though, that this may have a social impact on them.
Yeah.
Or at the time on him.
Because having the bit of fun that's down in the docks isn't really going to come back to haunt him. But if he falls in love with this person that he thinks is a dude skating on the ice, that's got repercussions.
Okay. Let's put it bluntly. No one cares if you bend over for a skipper. They do if you bend over a prince.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on there.
And but it turns out that the figure is in fact a Russian princess.
Mm.
And let's be noted, this ambiguity of sex continues throughout the book. With
ambiguity of sex is a major theme in Orlando.
And how something as simple as the way you dress can alter that radically.
Yeah.
Wouldn't TERFs hate this book? Because basically Virginia Woolf says
how you dress
it's almost impossible to tell genders apart unless, of course, you get into bed with someone.
Yeah, that's why I straight up started the stream with a dig at the channel punching bag.
Yeah, I will say though, I think TERFs could probably find a way to make the mental gymnastics work for them, insofar as they'd say, well, if you climb into bed, you see their genitals, and if their genitals are that, then that's what they are. But that would be a stretch, they'd be doing a lot of yoga.
Yeah.
Well, and then we get to the terrible fact that in a lot of U.S. states, trans panic is still a legal defense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As is gay panic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Gay panic is still a defense for pub brawls in some cases. Which is, listen, mate, if you're looking at anything else but where you're aiming, enough to know that someone else is looking at you at the urinals, you're the one with an issue. That's a you problem.
This is a comment that I like to put out about TERFs when they're talking about people in bathrooms. It's like, if you're spending all time in the bathroom staring at other people, you're the one with the issue here.
Yeah, that's a you problem.
That's a you problem.
Just let people pee, damn it.
But anyways, so they have a whirlwind romance.
Yeah.
And Orlando falls head over heels for Sasha.
Yeah.
Hang on, there's something about the name Sasha that I wanted to bring up.
Okay. But yeah, before this, we're gonna, back up because there are other affairs that are mentioned, and it kind of sets up a theme for gives us some insight into Orlando's personality. Because
Orlando is a hussy at the beginning and a hussy at the end.
Yeah. Well, because so it goes through, it goes through his a couple of his more notable affairs, and there's always like something that he notices, and then he's immediately turned off from them.
Yeah, like Orlando has very set tastes. We'll just point out Sasha is a unisex name. It's a diminutive Russian unisex name. It's a diminutive of Alexander or Alexandra.
Yeah.
So even within that, so now go back and watch all your old 70s spy movies and every Russian spy by the name of Sasha. Enjoy. You're welcome.
But, and like, for instance, he sees one of his affairs beating a dog, and she is immediately repulsive to him.
Yeah.
Which I don't blame him for that. I don't blame him for that.
Yeah, me neither. You don't beat the dog.
Yeah.
Not in the real sense or the euphemistic sense.
I was going to ask you about that. Was that a
Yeah. There's a lot of euphemisms in this book, I feel.
Doesn't beating the dog end up with red rockets?
No comment.
Sorry.
But and Orlando does have a brief moment of like she might end up, she'll probably end up ugly in 40 years, but he's still like way head over heels with her.
I think as well, what I like about this, we have a character who is, I'm going to say, under the bi umbrella.
Yeah.
Because we don't know if they're bi, pan, or how they would have identified it in modern terms.
Yeah.
Who has very set principles. They may not be the same principles as the other people around them or for their time, but a lot of their principles are very set. You don't harm animals. It's nice to see that, especially because we're so used to the predatory bi trope. I mean, don't get me wrong, this does fall a little bit into the slutty bi trope, but have fun. Everyone's consenting. Have fun.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting character exploration.
Yeah. But then Orlando catches or thinks he catches Sasha with a deckhand.
Yes, because Orlando, while still having principles, is also a massive fucking hypocrite.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then, on top of that, the night they're going to run off, she stands him up and leaves with the Russian embassy. And
the ice cracks.
Hold on. Did he really think she was going to stay when her entire country people are leaving?
Yeah. Well,
that's not a stand-up. That's just life.
Well, the plan, from what I gather, the plan was that he was going to go with her.
Got to wake up earlier. Sessions are 3 hours ahead of the UK.
And so he falls into a deep, dark depression. and goes off to his estate.
Dark Night of the Soul, because
goes up to his estate for about
19th century literary
years.
trope. Yeah. But yeah, Dark Night of the Soul is quite a common one.
And
it's quite common in religious texts, which is,
and goes about on working on his poetry.
Again, heartbroken poet, because
heartbroken.
Yeah.
19th century literary tropes.
Yeah. And
fiddling with my hair.
And of course turns 30.
Because
yeah. And so during this point, he invites the poet Nick Green to his estate.
And does a lot of redecorating.
Well,
yes. And gets dogs.
Yeah.
Well, so they have a conversation that stretches several pages about how Nick Green thinks that nothing will come of the Elizabethan literary movement, and nothing can beat the Greeks. And if you're going to write literature, it has to be in the style of the Greek. It has to be in the classical style. You have to study your Cicero.
Yeah.
Can I point out the classical style of poetry is Catullus?
Yeah.
That's it. That's all I'm saying on that subject.
And we're gonna put a pin in that for right now, because there's some brilliant symmetry with that near the end of the book.
Oh, there is.
So, and Orlando gives him the manuscript of one of his plays.
Mm-hmm.
If I remember right, it's The Death of Hercules.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Excuse me, fiddling with my hair. Just ignore me.
Yeah. And Nick Green writes a satirical poem about Orlando. And
mocking Orlando.
And Orlando can't stand it, so he burns all of his poetry except for one that he's been working on since he was a boy, The Oak Tree, a poem. And then after Orlando swears off poetry, then he starts redecorating.
Yes, that's right. And then gets the dogs.
Yes.
So this is where your lonely, middle-aged, bisexual household designer comes from.
Yeah.
Virginia Woolf.
And then he realizes that, like, having this grand house is nothing if there aren't people in it. So he starts throwing lavish parties.
Again, because
19th century. I'm just going to leave that there until there's another.
Yeah.
Oh. And we have Keaton the Cretin here saying...
Is that Keaton the Cretin or Keaton the Cretin? I need to understand. Because that says cretin to me in the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah, it says cretin to me as well.
Yeah. Hi, Keaton.
Yeah.
And also, yes, Woolf had a great ability to write. There's a lot of famous writers from that era, and I mean, all the way from the mid 1800s onwards, who were very good at depressive states. Might be a bit earlier, but Christina Rossetti, Emily, what's her name? Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. That Emily.
Dickinson?
Maybe.
Yeah, I think that
one.
It sounds like a Dickinson rhythm.
Yeah.
It does.
Emily Dickinson, very good at depressive states. Pretty much any of them who were contemporaries of sort of the famous Renaissance artists and poets. Especially in English literature at the time, depression was kind of a bit of the default.
Yeah,
well, it kind of fits in with stuff other people we've talked about, like Wells, where you've got that same sort of theme.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
it does help that most of them had depression at some point, or had something that we would now recognize as depression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and they start throwing parties, and while they're in, and while he's in his room alone, he notices, and
I like the fact that Orlando really doesn't kind of attend the parties. Kind of,
the host doesn't attend their own parties because
true literary tropes.
But anyways, he notices an a female figure in the courtyard, who turns out to be an archduchess.
Yeah.
And now, could we talk? So should I put a pin in that, or should I talk about the issue?
It's all about gender roles and gender behavior and how one presents as a specific gender. I mean, what's interesting to me is that Orlando meets this person twice and is very much not attracted to them for very similar reasons.
Yeah. Well,
despite the fact that
So this archduchess creeps on Orlando so hard that Orlando decides to run to the furthest corner of the earth, i.e., take an ambassador, take on the role as ambassador to the court of the Sultan in Constantinople.
Is it Istanbul or is it Constantinople?
Officially Constantinople, probably at the time in the area it was probably colloquially known as Istanbul. Because fun fact, even though why Constantinople got the works was nobody's business but the Turks. The reason Constantinople became known as Istanbul is literally just through linguistic drift and laziness.
And very little politics involved,
Yeah, because basically what happened was, since Constantinople is the only big, was the only big city in the area, everybody just referred to it as the city. And the city in Turkish is Istanbul.
That's why it's Istanbul and Constantinople.
Yeah. And in fact, Istanbul only officially became known as Istanbul in 1937.
Yeah, so it still would have been known as Constantinople when Virginia Woolf wrote the book.
Well, yeah. So like I said, locally it's probably called Istanbul because everybody was just referring to it as the city. But officially, it's still Constantinople.
Oh, is it Istanbul?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, again, a lot of these famous writers from that era, Emily Dickinson, Christine... I'm not sure if Christina Rossetti was institutionalized. I know she was bedbound for a long time because her brother Dante was one of the Renaissance artists and she was a Renaissance poet. And she spent a lot of time sort of in sickness. So it is, it's just a thing, okay? When you're depressed and you have nowhere to go and you're stuck in bed, or as we all are this year, I'm expecting great literary things from 2020 because everyone has had time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and no opportunity
Don't let me down.
Do movies, so yes, books.
Okay, yeah. I'm gonna leave this. This is the end of the There Might Be Giants references. Okay, I'm just gonna leave that there and say that. Okay, we are done with that song for the stream.
But is it Istanbul or Constantinople?
You can't go back to Constantinople. Okay, that was the last bit.
But why did they change it?
I don't know.
I think people just liked it better that way.
Yeah. Okay. So, and we get a bunch of, offhanded anecdotes about Orlando becoming something of a pseudo mythological figure in the city.
Yeah.
There are quite a few. Obviously, I'm Greek Roman. There are quite a few transgender personalities, or what we would recognize as transgender personalities in Greek and Roman mythology.
Yeah.
I think I sent Jen a list last week.
You did, and I haven't been through it yet.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot there. So do take a look. Just Google it. Just Google ancient Greek myth transgender. You will get plenty of hits and plenty to read. Famously, there are characters who were raised male but assigned female at birth because kings wanted sons. There are characters who were male and turned into women and just kept on carrying on, which is obviously pretty damn exactly what Orlando's plot is.
Yeah.
There are characters whose genders were changed or whose sex was changed as punishments for various things, or as depending on how you read it. There's also a fair bit of phallic symbolism in Medusa and what happened to her. Trigger warning if you go look up that story and you don't know it. In sort of the snake hair, the phallic symbolism of the snakes, and why that was done to her, and whether you view her as a victim or as a survivor very much informs your reading of that myth. Yeah. If she's a victim and she was being punished, then the snakes are just snakes and it's designed to make her ugly. But if she was a victim and she was being, the recent readings will say that she was, although they're not that recent to be fair, because Ovid was reading them this way, was saying that she was a victim and her patron deity, her goddess, was protecting her from that happening again. The snakes potentially then become some form of phallic symbolism of protection against things like that going on again.
So basically the snakes potentially defend from the snake.
Yes. Hair snakes are stronger than trouser snakes. You heard it here first.
But
yeah.
And gets another, gets a bunch of other honors and throws one last lavish party.
Yeah.
Always one last lavish party because
19th century literary tropes.
We need to make a jingle of that, of just you singing that.
Yeah. and so after the party, Orlando also started making a habit of sneaking out to, be among the populace.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And so sneaking out to be among the populace in the same way Diana was known to go out with Freddie Mercury dressed up as a bloke. That kind of sneaking out to be among the populace. Although with a little bit more explicit after party shenanigans than anything we've ever been told about Diana, which is fair because Diana is very recent and common, although it was with Freddie Mercury, so
yeah.
it's assumed.
And
they say was secretly married, but because the staff had seen
to a Spanish dancer.
They said this because the staff had seen a supposedly female climbing up into
a supposedly female, also supposed traveler climbing up into Orlando's room, and then Orlando goes into a long coma during the entirety of the revolution against the Sultan. And when they storm the ambassadorial palace, they assume that he is dead and just leave him there.
Yeah.
Orlando, let down your hair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now we reach the midpoint of the novel where modesty, it's like modesty, purity, and C word.
Chastity?
Yeah. No.
Brent's gone.
It's evoking the Greek idea of gods.
Yeah. But
yeah,
come say a few things over the body of Orlando, and the trumpets of truth blare out in answer to her.
Lady of purity, lady of chastity, lady of modesty. Yeah. I knew it was chastity. Yeah.
Yes. And
the trumpets of purity.
The trumpets of truth denounce their pronouncements.
This is just a great frigging scene. Because essentially what they're saying is the old virtues, the old ways are dead and truth lives.
Yeah. And,
which is very interesting for what happens next.
Yeah. And I will say something about this scene because of the way that, even though the prose is very fucking purple.
It is kind of beautiful, actually.
Brings it up. It is written out up to this point. It's still fairly like matter of fact, as if it was an actual biography being written.
Yeah.
So when this scene comes across, it hits like an acid trip. Or at least it did for me.
Yeah, it's also very bubble, toil and trouble.
Yeah.
Going on as well with the three ladies there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of insinuations of magic and all kinds of things going on. People climbing in windows. Obviously, there is a stereotype, and there has historically been a stereotype that travelers have some kind of access to the occult. Are very well versed in it, are capable of casting curses, charms. I'm sure you've all been to a seaside resort town and found someone reading palms claiming to be, I'm not going to use the word, but of traveler descent, Cassandra or all the rest of it. So that's very common. And I just wanted to point that out.
And then as this finishes up, Orlando wakes up and is now a woman.
As you do.
As you do.
They stand up and the sheet falls away and was most definitely a woman.
And this whole thing of the sheet falling away.
Yeah.
Looking at the ex-evangelical in the room, does that not have a feel of the tearing of the curtain in the rending of the curtain?
Yeah.
The rending of the veil?
I was thinking that was looking more along the lines of the things falling from your eyes, so that now you can see properly.
But the biblical story of and the veil was rended at the moment when the sky went dark. It's the death and resurrection themes going on there.
Yeah. Definitely. I'll be back momentarily.
Cool.
No problem. Yeah, I'll agree with you with that. I mean, that whole thing that they assumed Orlando was dead, and Orlando's been lying for this entire Civil War, basically.
Yeah, we thought you were dead.
We thought
Castaway vibes.
You're alive, and you've changed, but not to the point that they go, "Oh, definitely one of the most beautiful women in the land," and yet you don't look very different to how you did before. But you're definitely a woman. That's
a very pointed comment.
It's like definitely,
yeah, and it's like, okay, so one of the most beautiful women in the land was assigned male at birth.
Yeah.
Turfs, pay attention. There's a message there. Listen. Yep, and this This amuses me because it's the concept of Orlando is now, quote, a beautiful woman, but with the strength of a man and the grace of a woman.
Yeah.
And it's very... I don't like the way it assigns those virtues to each sex, but I can see the point that's been made. Because the existence of Orlando subverts them.
And I think, Virginia Woolf also says there, as any trans person would say, whilst definitely different to appearance to the people around them, Orlando was still exactly the same person.
Yeah.
None of their ideals or anything. Some of their concepts of how the world worked changed because of the way the world dealt with Orlando. But Orlando did not change. Orlando didn't change. The world's perception of Orlando did.
Yeah, and the thing is, the style of Orlando's thoughts and inner monologue doesn't change throughout the book.
No, it's exactly the same.
So, and this whole thing of, this is why the three ladies and truth, the three ladies leave, and now is the time for truth. And then Orlando wakes up as a woman. That's a very powerful image.
With no care about what's changed. Like nothing has changed.
Yeah, Orlando literally just gets dressed in unisex clothing, gathers up her possessions, and then goes to live with the travelers.
Yeah. And the travelers accept all this as normal. There's no questioning of it. This is a woman now.
Also,
folks, you could learn from this.
Also, it makes it it makes it at least it seems to me that Orlando possibly set this up.
Possibly because Orlando went straight to the people who presumably had a hand in it, in the person who climbed through the window. So you wonder if Orlando had made a deal somewhere.
I actually wondered if the suggestion was the person climbing through the window was Orlando anyway.
Well, no, because Orlando was also seen in the embrace of a supposed traveler woman.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
No,
so it does seem like there's that going on, and you do wonder what happened there. And I kind of like that it's not explicitly stated whether Orlando did it deliberately or not. But it doesn't catch Orlando by surprise, and that's very telling.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even though I've said I'm currently questioning my gender, if I suddenly woke up and these were gone and there was extra between my thighs, I'd be wondering what the hell. I'd still be like, none of that from Orlando. Like, not even. So I think you've got a point in that. Quite possibly this was prearranged in some way. And it's got that whole Sleeping Beauty vibe thing to it as well, hasn't it? Of sexual maturity after a long sleep, a long period of what is metaphorically a period of ignorance and a period of not knowing what's going on. And the world has changed around Orlando as well, and that's important.
The world constly changes around Orlando because of the movement through time.
But Orlando is a fixed point in time.
Doesn't, Orlando spends some time with the gypsies out in nature. So,
before we go with the gypsies, there is
travelers. I apologize.
Oh, me too. Before we get onto that, though, there is also the aspect of Orlando being virtually comatose for that period of time. And then the whole idea of a veil comes off. We got the tropes of the curtain tearing and the
resurrection,
things from your eyes and resurrection. There's also the concept of a butterfly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
In that, very much so.
Yeah, there is a lot of butterflyness going on there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of beautiful.
It is. I love the way it's written. It is just... And even though it's flowery, unlike the other flowery in the books, this bit only takes a page.
Yeah.
And yet it's probably the most beautiful bit of prose in the entire thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like like for instance, while this is like probably one of the most flowery passages of the book, I wouldn't really consider this purple prose.
No, because the situation it's dealing with requires that flowery language.
It does, and it doesn't drag on with it.
Yeah, and it does give that moment the gravitas it deserves.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah,
with the language it uses.
So then you can go back to your point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and we're gonna kind of breeze through this because the bit with the travelers does do a lot of stereotyping.
Oh, God,
it does.
You warned me about this before I started reading the book, Ring, and
yeah,
he's like their warning, his warning, but also like times 10.
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
so
sorry, I forgot about the bit with the travelers because it's been so long since I'd read it previously that I'd forgotten about it.
Yeah, so like I said, book of its time, and the traveler bit is where we see most of that racist stuff.
Yeah, but there is an interesting point to be made.
Yeah.
In that, talking about missionaries and Christian imperialism, the imperialism of Christian countries.
Yeah.
A lot of places, including sort of Romani and travelers and other things, have concepts of third gender, dual gender, mixed, gender fluid, had those concepts. Those concepts were stamped out by Christian missionaries.
Yeah.
So the idea that Orlando goes to these culture, the nearest culture available to her, that will accept this change, and that it's not a Christian culture,
and
that it is a culture that predates Christian missionaries, and that has been largely untouched by it because of its nomadic nature, is so important because it's making a point about imperialism and about religious imperialism.
And that the travelers, at least at the beginning, take Orlando in as their own.
Exactly. And there's no question.
Yeah.
Well, even to the point that they're suggesting at one point up until they have issues with the way Orlando's going, that they're thinking that she should marry one of them and really become part of the group.
Yeah, because the way you join that community is by marrying them, and it's
marriage.
Yeah.
But Orlando's already married to her poetry.
And Orlando has a god that the travelers do not recognize, and that god is nature.
That god is nature.
That
is flowery. But I like the argument there where Orlando's considering how to stay with them, and could I see the world their way where it's just where the grass is just green and the sky is just blue, and then no, I can't do that. And we get back to the flowery language of how the grass is to Orlando and how the sky is, and how the mountains and the plants.
There's a lot of reach out and touch and enjoy, for tomorrow we die, which gives a great. It's one of those things where I know I have at least one Torchwood fan here. I presume I have two. And however many more in the audience. There's a great quote from there that's just literally popped into my head. When Jack is talking about his immortality, at one point he says, when you've got forever, you don't stop to enjoy the little things.
Yeah.
And because Orlando doesn't know that they've got forever, they're constantly aware of the little things.
Yeah.
And almost hyperfixated on the little things to the detriment of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting. Imagine not knowing you were immortal and going through life like that. Living it. And there's a great that's a callback to a Renaissance idea that was taken from the ancient Greeks and Romans. It's a Stoic concept of memento mori, Remember that one day. Remember one day you will die. That's why you always see in Renaissance art and in a lot of Renaissance poetry, you'll see skulls. The skull imagery is very famous. Sometimes there'll be there's like an Italian chapel in Florence, I think, that's got like a full skeleton on the floor, just randomly, like this beautiful like cathedral type chapel, and there's a skeleton on the floor.
Oh, and there's also I think it might be a Holbein, that like famous picture with like the 3D skull.
Yeah, and if you look at it from the wrong angle, you don't see the skull, but if you look at it from the right angle, you do. That's up at the British Museum. We saw that when we were on honeymoon ring. Because I stood and stared at it for about 10 minutes, and Ring got annoyed at me.
And then you got annoyed at me when I started staring at post-impressionist stuff.
Yes, because look at it. What is there to see? It's blurry. Move on. Yeah, we have very different taste in art. I'm very Renaissance. He's very post-impressionist. It makes for some interesting discussions.
Yeah.
But yeah. So anywhere you see a skull in artwork, it's very likely to be a callback to the Stoics, starting with Aristotle. The famous Stoic at the moment is Marcus Aurelius and his Meditations.
Yeah.
We are in a period of Neo-Stoicism, invented by Becker in 1997. That's Becker, Becker, who wrote A New Stoicism in 1997, followed by Pigliucci and a few others. Ryan Holiday did a few, and it started the advent of Stoicism as self-help. If it works for you, it works for you. But Stoicism is also the basis of things like CBT. So clearly there's some evidence for it, but it goes all the way back to Aurelius. Previous to that, it goes back through Zeno. Zeno's kind of the advent of Stoicism. And I'm getting into talking about the dissertation I wrote, so I need to stop now or I'm not going to stop.
Yeah. So, and she has a falling out with the travelers because she can't get herself to see things their way.
Yeah.
And as Virginia Woolf, put it herself,
I don't remember that line in the book.
Yeah. No.
I think that's the donkey that Orlando was riding.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. No, that's me scrolling through my Twitter trying to find the thread I posted.
I will say as well, it is very pointed that there's a point in the book where Orlando is speaking to the oldest man of the Traveller tribe.
Yeah.
And the oldest man, after Orlando has been talking about the house they grew up in, this big ancestral home, realizes that the others are quite uneasy at this description because obviously they're used to caravans and moving around and being nomadic. The elder of the tribe, if you like, takes Orlando aside and says, "Don't be ashamed of your heritage."
Yeah.
And there's this beautiful moment where Orlando realizes that a 500-year lineage, which is nothing to be sniffed at, let's be clear here, that's minor aristocracy. Some royal lines aren't that old. A lot of royal lines aren't that old in the modern day. Is nothing to quote these people who helped build the pyramids.
Yeah.
Which is very pointed. And is feeds into that whole, these people predate Christian imperialism. These people have their own ways.
But anyways, no passion is stronger in the breast of man than the desire to make others believe as he believes.
I need that on a t-shirt.
You know what?
Rain, you have Teespring?
Yeah, I'll get on it.
Is that going to include the I swear it's not COVID?
Yeah.
Cough, cough. I swear it's like what we need is asterisk, cough, asterisk, asterisk, cough, asterisk. I swear it's not COVID 2020.
Yeah. But anyways, and so she begins to have a falling out with the travelers over these differences of outlook. And as she's up in the mountain, she has a vision, or as Virginia Woolf put it, nature either performed a miracle or played a trick on her.
This again is such a great callback to Greek mythology and characters changing. And it's usually either a trick or a miracle.
Yeah, and she, receives a vision of an English park, and then decides that she must return to England. And it turns out the travelers were planning on murdering her because horrific racist stereotypes.
Yeah. Horrific racist stereotypes. Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there, and I feel like we should burn the whole suitcase. But
no, we should throw that suitcase back into the fires from which it was forged.
Yeah, and move on to the.
I'm not climbing that mountain.
You gotta ford the stream instead.
No, I'm gonna make Sam carry me up there and throw the suitcase over.
Oh.
So
anyway, Orlando
buys passage on a ship, and really
with her pearls.
Yes,
which oddly enough she had anyway. Family pearls that she.
Are you aware of what what family pearls is a euphemism for?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, and that's something that's historically quite common. Women bartering passage by an evening in the skipper's cabin, shall we say?
Quite common. She uses her family pearls quite often to get.
Yes.
Well,
and, marriages performed at sea are only valid for the duration of the voyage.
Well, that puts how she paid for eggs during her time with the travelers on a new spin.
Yes, it does, but it's not a particularly surprising one.
Yeah.
Because again, the thing is, travelers. This is something I'm aware of. It still goes on in modern. A lot of traveler communities don't deal, and I know this through personal experience, don't like dealing with banks and financial institutions. Yeah. They don't even particularly like dealing in cash. They barter and trade.
Yeah.
So the idea of, obviously for those who don't know, I work in a bank, and we will get traveler people calling occasionally, and the number of them whose mathematic ability is, quite low, or their literacy is quite low, because in the culture they're in and they live in, that's not what they need. They need to know how to do things like cook, clean, build. They don't need to be reading and writing, and that feeds into a lot of the whole thing about Orlando saying, can Orlando view the world the way they do in that way? And it's an interesting discussion to have. I will say, if there are ever any travelers who are going to listen to this, don't be, if you need a financial institution, there are things in place to help you. Don't be worried about calling up if you do have difficulties with numbers and reading. I'm just going to put my customer service hat on for a minute and say, we will help. Don't be worried about it at all. I know I do personally all the time. So it's one of those things. This distrust of set institutions like financial institutions and money is something that I don't know how widespread it is, but it does seem to be quite it's a concept that still exists in modernity.
Yeah.
So yeah, climbing back off my soapbox now, carry on.
Yeah. So, and during the voyage home, she, like, for the first time, she has she basically spends the voyage basking in her newly found femininity.
Her ankle and the guy nearly falls from the mast.
Yeah.
Okay, can I point out, basking in her newly found femininity? Sweetheart, you're living in a time before carpal tunnel treatment. Be careful. Come on, let's be honest. That's what that meant.
Yeah.
That's what that was getting at.
Actually, I don't think that phrase is actually in the book.
No, but a lot of it was vaguely insinuated because there's not a lot to do on a long sea voyage.
Yeah, and, the captain offers her an extra slice of beef.
Oh.
With 2 veg? Yeah, this whole section of the book is just pure innuendo. Enjoy.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
And the man falling from the mast, and it also, like, I should point out, women on ships.
Yeah.
Women on ships is quite a modern thing. Again, it's definitely not a franchise you should go to for your history lessons in maritime history. But one thing the Pirates of the Caribbean gets right is that a lot of ships and ships' crews would have been very superstitious about having a woman on board.
Yeah.
They still had passage for women, though.
Yeah, but there would have been the women would have been very much not seen so much, and there would have been crew members who were very superstitious about them.
But
having said that, Orlando's trip back is not 15th century by now. I think we're in the 17th century by now.
Yeah, so we're getting into sort of an industrial, well, not industrial revolution, French Revolution. But we're heading towards an industrialized situation in which, in the Industrial Revolution, gender lines became incredibly blurred.
Yeah.
So everyone worked and everyone pitched in.
Also, this is one of the most pithy and wonderful quotes from the book.
Go.
If the sight of my ankles means death to an honest fellow who no doubt has a wife and a family to support, I must in all humanity keep them covered.
Yeah, it's like... But, I mean, Virginia Woolf was writing that for the time that passage was set in, more so than her own time.
Yeah.
And she was making mockery of those ideals.
Yeah, it's very much a mockery of your tablecloths and...
Yeah.
Yeah. That just amuses me.
Yeah.
Again, yeah.
I had it, and I do find that, barring the problematic chapter with the travelers, the book gets a lot more comedic after Orlando becomes a woman.
Oh, it does. Yeah.
Women have a better sense of humor, didn't you know?
Well, it seems to me that's where the social commentary, really starts, and that's when Virginia can take her jabs, and take her jabs she does.
Then all you're doing is getting this story about this guy, and then all of a sudden the meat of the story is thrown at you.
Yeah, because
and she goes back and ties everything in the past to what's happening now.
Because let's be honest, people who make social commentary are people who are victims of social conventions. People who fit with social conventions and who it suits and who've never questioned their gender, their sexuality, their place in life, their privilege, are never going to produce apt social commentary because they've got no basis for that. They've got no reason to question it. Yeah. So in order to give the character a reason to question it, you have to make them exist beyond or at least on the fringes of that social norms.
Yeah.
And changing from male to female and living for hundreds of years is definitely on the fringes.
Well, and also being completely not only changing from male to female, but also being gender fluid.
Yeah.
And being bisexual or pansexual, whichever way you want to describe it.
Yeah. I will say as well, not changing their personality when their sex changed is so... I see it a lot, and this is not a criticism, but I do see a lot of transgender people who become uber masculine or uber feminine when they make that transition. And if that's what you want to do, cool, you do you. But you do not have to. You do not have to prove or be you don't have to be so feminine if you are female but assigned male at birth or vice versa.
Yeah.
You are who you are. You don't have to performative gender roles.
Are just bullshit.
Only perform them if you want to. That's what they're there for. They're not a rod for you to beat yourself with.
And I think that's an export. And given that it's Trans Awareness Week, that's the best of the themes to take from Orlando is that just be yourself, which is a major theme of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So.
Not sponsored, just thirsty.
Yeah.
Wouldn't object to sponsorship though.
Wouldn't object to sponsorship, but just thirsty.
Well, I
even
mean,
wear a Santa hat.
Technically, this is somewhat semi-sponsored because I do have a patron now. Thank you, Santi the Sane.
But unless Santi is employed by these people, not sponsored.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, somewhat sponsored, but not by Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
Or by Reading Rainbow.
Or any of this. I'm pretty sure, like, most of this, I would not take sponsorship from the creator. So, But
let's face it, that sponsor wouldn't want to sponsor
that wouldn't want to sponsor me.
Yeah. Yeah, something tells me that, that particular individual wouldn't want to have anything to do with this channel.
I wonder if we could get somebody to draw a caricature of that particular person and you could have merchandise, a mini punching bag merchandise made. I think we might get in trouble for that.
What we should do is...
Or maybe... like merch with a picture of a punching bag that has a lightning bolt on it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, hold on though. Let's be clear here. If we're talking about caricatures of that, it's already been done and it was prophetic. It was the Wicked Witch of the West.
Oh. All right, well, we've gone off track again.
Yeah. Channel punching bag. Let's carry on.
Yeah. So, do we have anything more to talk about the voyage or not?
Other than the voyage of discovery of Orlando basking in their femininity.
Yeah.
You've said those words and it's kind of stuck in my head, even though I don't think they're actually in the text.
No, they aren't. It's literally just the way I put that. It's just the way I describe that chapter.
Isn't there a line in there about coming upon the White Cliffs or something?
Yes.
As they approach England? Yes. I thought that.
The White Cliffs of Dover.
Yeah, and they sail into the Thames, and the captain points out, St. Paul's Cathedral, the Houses of Parliament, like all the landmarks.
But all the things that have changed since Orlando was last there, because it's been over a century since Orlando was last in England. So things have changed drastically. And yet some of the boats that were there when the Thames froze are still there.
Yeah.
It's like a century has passed and some things are still there which shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
and other things have changed significantly. It's an odd narrative for this stretch of time.
I mean, not necessarily. Ships do have a quite longevity when they're well looked after.
Yeah, that's true.
But a lot of it is, the imagery it's that clash of old and new, and it does seem to reflect a little bit of. I felt it might have reflected a little bit of what was going on in Orlando's mental state. Of there's a great quote from somewhere, I can't remember who said it. Who said, "When you return to a place you once knew, you do not see how it has changed. You see how you have changed."
Oh, definitely, and it's very much. That's very much a trope within. Oh, we're back to tropes. But very much a trope within this.
Yeah. And it is very much that London hasn't changed. London, yes, there's a few new buildings, but the core and the meat of what London is, the people, the ships, that hasn't changed. What's changed is Orlando.
Yeah.
And that's
and Orlando's legal situation.
Oh,
because one, Orlando is dead. 2, Orlando is dead and thus cannot own property. 2, Orlando is a woman and thus cannot own property. And then the sticky matter with the supposedly being married to a dancer and having 3 sons clamoring after her fortune.
Yeah.
Being dead is a very sticky legal situation. Hashtag understatement.
Yeah. And she can't handle all the attention, so she goes back to her estate.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a cyclic pattern in the book, and thus a theme in and of itself is aside from the bit in Constantinople and the bit with the travelers.
Wait, at this point, is it Istanbul or Constantinople?
Hush you.
Hey!
Orlando basically spends the entirety of the book bouncing back between her estate and London. And in fact, you could say the bits of, in the Turkish lands are a continuation of that theme, because she goes from, her estate to the city, to the bit with the travelers, to London, to her estates.
So are we going to talk about the urban-rural divide? And the imagery of these books and the difference between the urban and rural, and how Orlando is in urban and rural settings.
Yeah.
Orlando is, whether male or female, a city person. They thrive in the city.
Yeah.
We see that with the way they question things when they're with the travelers, and how they only seem to retreat to the country when they're depressed or they've got problems. So it's very much, it's almost like the rural settings are both escape, but borderline being almost a prison for the character.
Yeah.
And it's the character then injects the city into that rural landscape by holding the dinner parties, etc. And that's when the character comes to life.
Yeah.
So quite obviously this person is a city person, and is, but that's where they belong.
So she goes back to her estate and hangs out there, and then we're visited by the Archduke, and here's where I'm going to bring up my problem.
Duchess.
Well, yes, visited by the Archduchess, and Orlando goes
from a century and a half previously.
Yeah, and Orlando goes to, get the snack cakes or whatever, and comes back, and the Archduchess is now a man, because
and very obviously a man now, even though they were very obviously a woman before.
Yeah. And this is my problem, because it does kind of dip into a problematic trope. Because the Archduke tells Orlando that back, before I saw your picture, and I was crushing on you really, really hard. So I disguised myself as a woman to try and woo you.
Yes, it's the predatory transgender person trope, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is not a thing that exists in real life.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, there's a hint of something there that you kind of touched on and then moved on from because you were making that point.
Yeah.
The transgender people in this book seem to live a hell of a long time.
Yeah.
They do. They do,
Yeah.
don't they?
Like,
I know.
the people who are on the fringes of society, who are either homosexual or transgender or bisexual, who are LGBTQIA, all seem to live a really long time, either physically or at least in memory and in cultural memory, i.e. Pope, what have you. Kind of beautiful.
It is. And also, when you talk about that particular trope, I also saw it from the point of view of Virginia Woolf was also, I think, more so than using it as even though I'm pretty sure Terse would take that as, predatory trans person. She was more using it as a thing of the fear of being seen to be in a homosexual relationship. Which would be more resonant to her than this fear of
it's this concept of a beard.
Yeah.
But what I like about Orlando is doesn't like the female version of this character, doesn't like the male either, for the exact same reasons. They're boring and a bore.
Yeah. And predatory and visually from not visually and perceived from Orlando's point of view as being predatory in either gender.
Yeah. Which
but
is
not predatory. The gender they're persuading isn't the point of that. The point is this person is just that.
Yeah.
It's just a predator. Yeah.
And
so and isn't trans anyway, is a con person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not even like they're not a cross-dresser in the sense of they cross-dress to suit their individual gender expression on a day-by-day basis. They cross-dress in the pursuit of gain and in the pursuit of lying to other people.
Yeah.
But they are different to someone like Orlando, who is using their dress and their fashion sense to express their gender.
Which is kind of interesting, considering how Orlando gets rid of the Archduke.
Go on.
So, after days of being visited by the Archduke and hearing his boring stories about how he shot this reindeer and it was bigger than the elk he shot, and he shot an albatross. Was the albatross as big as an elephant?
The snack on there. And again, it's this, Orlando doesn't have time for people who are unnecessarily cruel to animals, do they?
Yeah.
Like, you've got the person who beats the dog and then the person who hunts for sport. And Orlando is a meat eater. And when they were with the travelers, the point is made they care about their goats for the meat and the milk and all the rest of it. And so clearly Orlando sees the difference between aesthetic and necessity when it comes to meat and hunting and all the rest of it, and doesn't like people who...
This is also a change and a set of personal growth for Orlando, because when you go back to the beginning of the book and you're talking about the hunting for heads, and even though we're also talking about that as being people, there's hints that they're any sort of hunting trophy, which also would have included animals on the wall as well.
Yeah.
But Orlando went from that to, no, I don't like this. I don't. No, none of this.
Killing for fun is not.
Killing for fun is not a good thing.
Orlando, to get away from the boring hunting stories, Orlando suggests a game of Fly-Loo, which
is the stupidest fucking game I've ever heard of in my life. I used to work in a casino.
I've heard of stupider.
People will bet on anything. Is the message of this part of the book?
Well, yeah, I've heard of stupider. Have you heard of chickens? It's like chicken squares or chicken drop.
There's also snail racing, which is unexpectedly popular.
Well, no, chicken drops stupider.
Is that decided by which square the chicken shits in?
Yeah.
But anyways, Fly-Loo is they get 3 lumps of sugar, and they make bets on to which lump of sugar a fly will land on first. And so, and this distraction gets very dull.
Of course it does. You're waiting for flies to land on sugar. Might as well watch paint dry.
So Orlando, and Orlando doesn't feel as bad about this because they're already half dead with the cold because it's in the winter. But Orlando, catches a fly, kills it, puts it on,
glues it on.
Yeah, glues it onto one of the lumps with gum arabic, and starts cheating and winning a bunch of money from the Archduke. And then the Archduke catches Orlando, and that's too much for him. So he takes his leave after getting a toad dumped down his shirt.
Yeah, he was ready to forgive Orlando for the cheating.
Yeah.
And then she grabs a toad and shoves it down his shirt. And that's it.
That is definitely the equivalent of being in a nightclub and telling the guy no and him coming on anyway, so throwing your drink at him. That's what that is.
Yeah. Oh, it was.
But then she realizes that she's missing something.
Yes, the captain. And that little tingle as he offers to cut her meat.
Yeah. She is hit with a yearning for life and a lover.
Yeah. So she's missing the captain and the little tingle.
Yeah. So she goes back to the city and I think, spend some time in high society and spend some time in the company of rather famous poets and satirists.
Well, whilst at the same time spending her nights also spending time with other areas of society, including hookers.
Yeah.
Yeah, now there is a point to be made here. All 3 of the named poets are all famous satirists in their own right. And I wonder, given the nature of how they are portrayed in this text, if this is not Woolf's way of saying, hey, this is a satire, pay attention.
Yeah.
Because it kind of does hit you round the head with a frigging textbook.
Yeah.
When you know about these people. I half expected, I saw Pope, I saw, who's the other one?
Addison.
Yeah.
No, not Addison, the other one.
Swift.
Yeah, I saw Pope and Swift, and I genuinely half expected Dryden to pop up, even though it's like...
And I mean, Dryden is name dropped in other places, but...
Yeah, but Dryden's the other really famous satirist of the time.
It wouldn't have been impossible considering it.
Yeah. But what we're saying is Orlando surrounds herself with people intelligent enough to see the faults of the time they are in and poke fun at it.
Yeah.
People who understand that social mores exist only to be laughed at and ridiculed. And that's important for Orlando's character.
Yeah.
Because it's saying, Orlando's saying, I don't fit in and I need to surround myself with people who don't expect me to.
Yeah. And also Orlando starts being a lot more fluid in their expression.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think this is the bit
when she dresses up as a man and to go out into the city at night, and everyone just assumes she is a man because it's how she's presenting herself, and she holds herself in that countenance.
Mm.
So when she even picks up a hooker and goes back to their place, and then feels the guilt of it and just announces, "Oh no, I'm actually a woman," and the hooker goes, "Oh, thank goodness for that. This is going to be so much better than America."
Yeah.
And I think this is also the section in the book where Virginia Woolf basically talks about how your gender is how you express it.
Yeah.
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 I also, because we've mentioned Pope, would like to talk about the text that's referenced, which is available on Project Gutenberg, so you can read it. It's not, first of all, I have to say, the text itself is not what you think it is.
Yeah.
Because it's called The Rape of the Lock.
Oh, the Rape of the Lock.
Yeah. And it's not what you think it is. It is not about a rape, nor is it about a lock, as in a key. What it's about is a high society lady getting a lock of her hair cut. Because obviously in classical mythology and classical languages, the word to rape meant to steal or to take.
Yeah.
So it's literally the theft of the hair, the theft of the lock of hair. And it's played out as this great social thing. But the person it happens to, Belinda, the character in The Rape of the Lock, is kind of indifferent, and it's the people around her who are throwing a fit. And she sort of sees the humour in it. And sort of sees the humour of, is that really, like, if that's the worst that's going to happen to me, like, you know.
And Orlando is Forrest Gumped into the inspiration of this poem.
Yeah. Orlando is Forrest Gumped in there. In the the dedication, I would say. This is dedicated to Madam.
Yeah.
And when you know about Madam and the history of Madam, it's quite obvious that Orlando is particularly Forrest Gumped into that. Although it's claimed to be to Mrs. Arabella Fermor, if you read it, a lot of it is it's Orlando. That's what Wolf's going for here.
Yeah.
Quote, yet you may bear me witness it was intended only to divert a few young ladies who have good sense and good humour enough to laugh not only at their sex's little unguided follies, but at their own. Which kind of sums up Orlando, doesn't it? Someone who is very good at recognizing their own little follies in either sex.
And and like I said, this is where Virginia also, goes into gender is how we present it, which is a very modern, realization for something from this time. But a quote I'd like to highlight: in every human being, a vacillation from one sex to the other takes place, and often it is only the clothes that keep the male or female likeness, while underneath the sex is the very opposite of what is above.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think stands on its own merit and requires very little further commentary, unless either of you got anything else to add to it.
Well, I'd like to point out any TERFs who ever watch this, that's never going to happen. But this was written in published in 1928. Trans people were a thing back then.
Yeah.
Gender fluidity was a thing back then. It just wasn't cool by the same names we have now. But people did understand this.
But also, I will point out, this was written in 1928 by a feminist author.
Yeah. Also, can I point out binary gender roles? Binary gender roles are difficult, and I cannot think of a single period in human history where gender roles, societal expectations of gender, roles pertaining to sex are as clear-cut as man penis, woman vagina.
Yeah.
There's no such thing. It has never been like that. There have always been women who took on male jobs, men who did more feminine things throughout history.
Possibly say in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, they were tried to do a lot of pushing into that direction.
But it was idealized. It wasn't actual. It wasn't something that existed. It was an idealized concept. It's like us saying, our time now, everyone looks like Tom Cruise because he's on the TV a lot. Yeah. No, he's an idealized version. There may have been one or two who look kind of like that. Although, if anyone looks at Tom Cruise in the future, I promise we're not all that short. That's kind of the point of that. There will be a few examples, but it is very much a piece of propaganda. Not every Russian woman in the 60s was this woman who could easily work a farm and a machine and raise children, and not every French female was all the right curves, all the right places, and ooh la la. No, people are varied, and there is never a point in time of a culture where people are a mono. What's the word I'm looking? People aren't oods. Okay, we don't share a brain.
Yeah.
I'm trying to talk around the word because I can't remember it, but we don't share a brain.
Hive minds.
That's the one.
Hive minds, yeah.
But anyways, a lot of adventures are also alluded to as, Orlando goes about being happy and gender fluid. And gives me very Julie Dobney vibes.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I don't have easy access to that quote, so I cannot read it out.
Yeah.
But if you don't know about Julia Dobney, look her up.
Yeah, that's an interesting character.
She was a French opera singer and duelist who was famously bisexual, and got in trouble for dueling too much.
And was better at fighting than most of the men at the time.
Yeah.
Had to run away from Paris, not because she was bisexual she was bisexual. She had to run away not because of her sexuality, but because dueling was technically illegal at the time.
Yeah.
If you've seen Milan, you get the gist.
Yeah.
Yeah. I famously her rescue of her lover from the monastery.
It was like something out of the Mark of Zorro.
Yeah, it's insane. She stole a body from a morgue, smuggled it in there, set her lover's room on fire, and let the body burn within the room, and then escaped
with her lover.
Yeah,
but a woman.
Anyways, and the Restoration Age, ends, and the Victorian era dawns.
Yeah, I think dawns is the wrong word for how that's described, don't you think?
Yeah.
I think looms might be a better word.
Yeah, it looms. It damps.
Yeah.
Even the weather changed.
Yeah, like overnight.
Overnight, yeah.
And this is a great... I'm a historian, so, a lot of people do try and draw great generalizations about periods of history. We have the Roman Republic, the Victorian era, the 50s, the 60s. It's never that simple. And you can never look at an age in isolation, because there will always be things that came before that influenced it, and it will never be a delineation of one day it was this, the next day it was this. Unless you're talking about something like the reign of a member of a royal family or something where there is a set start date, it's very rare. Like, perfect example, completely unrelated to any of this. The Vietnam War, when did it start?
It depends on what you mean.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because most university courses that teach the Vietnam War start in 1914. Because that's how far back you trace French imperialism in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And French imperialism in Vietnam is one of the major factors of the start of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And the Vietnam War happened in the 60s. But unless you know what happened in the 10s, you're missing out. Equally, the Cold War, when did it end? Everyone likes to think it ended with people climbing a wall and tearing it down. But let's be honest, the Cold War didn't officially end until a good few years later. And unofficially, there's an argument to say that the Cold War never ended, because there is still that tension between the US and the Russians.
And
probably tells the USSR anymore.
The Soviet Union ended, not the Cold War.
Exactly.
Also, arguably, you could say, you could say that the Cold War just shifted focus.
You could possibly say the Cold War ended once Trump started sucking Putin's dick.
No, you couldn't, because there's still major tensions with the Russians.
There is.
And also, there's
also Nixon did it first.
There's the whole there's the whole Cold War in the Middle East between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Yeah, exactly. And the proxy wars have never ended.
Yeah.
Like, do you really think the USA went into Afghanistan to help?
And
really?
Let's
and
face
that's
it,
just one example.
China flexing their muscles towards everybody at the moment. And
just look at US foreign policy on Cuba. It hasn't changed.
All I'm going to say on U.S. involvement in Afghanistan is look at what country is between Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah. Also, I will point out, literally, I saw this on an interview once. Everyone knows the Russians were in Afghanistan about a decade before the Americans were.
Yeah.
Someone made a documentary when the Americans were first going in there, and they asked a Russian foreign policy advisor, they said, if you had one bit of advice for the Americans going into Afghanistan, what would you tell them? And he looked at the camera and he said, don't.
Yeah.
You will lose.
But,
and
but for once in her life, Orlando discovers that she isn't in sync with the spirit of the era.
Yes, because the spirit of the Victorian era was fucked.
Yeah.
We're still recovering.
Yeah.
It was prudish and cold, and a lot of it
weren't being sexually promiscuous anymore, and they were all getting rings on their fingers. And
and the thing is, in an industrialized area before this, Orlando was very much at home in urban environments.
Yeah.
So again, it's not Orlando that's changed. It's the nature of what urban means.
Yeah.
And it's that long passage of time. Again, you are right. Orlando is very much a Forrest Gump character watching history happen rather than making history happen.
Yeah.
Although there is something she loves about the Victorian area. Bookstores.
But before that, so first she retires back to her estate.
Yeah.
And notices an odd tingle in the third finger of her left hand.
Yeah.
This woman, I swear, when she fell asleep and, you know, spontaneously grew a womb or whatever she did, she also must have like developed prophetic body parts.
Yeah.
I just, yeah.
Well, that's, you know, of course, this is how she, you know, discovers she's out of sync with the spirit of the Victorian era, because everyone is married and she isn't.
And she's not even sure if she wants to be, you know. But she is married to her art, to her poetry.
Yeah.
And she wants to have every port, you know, she wants any port in a storm, you know.
She wants to be one of those confirmed bachelors, but she's a woman, so she can't be.
And of course, though, because of this problem, she can't. She has hit a dam on her working on the oak tree, because during all this bits, she's still been hammering at the oak tree, a poem. So she goes out and declares that she will be married to nature, and trips and falls
and twists her ankle.
Yep.
Twists or breaks.
I think it says twists.
It also refers to it as a break later on. So
yeah,
and she couldn't get up herself.
Yeah.
So she thought, I would just lay here and become one with the ground again, which goes back to the backbone of the earth, etc.
It's also very dramatic.
It is.
Yeah.
Oh, it is.
Orlando is a dramatic person.
Bring me my smelling salts. It was very much that Victorian trope. Yeah.
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 Maybe not quite as out of sync with the gender mores of the time as you think you are there, Orlando.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then Marbet, let's see, it's
it's Marmaduke.
Yeah, Marmaduke. I forget the full name.
I'm sorry, I couldn't look at that name and not see like a giant ass dog. I'm sorry.
Shows up, and also, hold on, I've got to pop it back up again, because 19th century literary tropes, they instantly recognize each other as soulmates.
Yeah.
Soulmate AU. That's called the soulmate AU. It's quite a common fan fiction trope.
Yeah. And so they have a whirlwind romance and get married just as the wind picks up, and he has to go to sail around the Cape of Good Hope in a storm.
Because he's a sailor and...
Yeah.
19th century literary tropes. But I love the description of their conversations where it's like, are you sure you're not a man? And she's like, are you sure you're not a woman?
It's because the way they both behave, they don't match the gender social norms of the time.
Yeah.
He's very what Orlando would call effeminate. She's very what he would call masculine.
Yeah. And of course,
that's what they love about each other.
Since all queer people are immortal, and he does, and spoilers for the end, he does live into the future.
Yeah. Was it? It must be. It's about like 50 years later when he finally stops going around.
Yeah. But now that now that she has the ring on her finger and has resynced with the spirit of the time, she actually manages to finish the Oaktria poem.
Yeah, because he's her muse.
Yeah, but then realizes that out in her estate, now that it's finished being written, it must be read.
Honestly, she'd have been better off just planting an acorn when she was a kid.
Yeah, and she goes back to London and runs into Nick Green,
Mm-hmm.
who is also immortal.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'd argue that this is more like in regards to the text, this is more symbolic. Because this Nick Green is a knight. Has been knighted and is a professor of literature rather than.
He doesn't look like the original Nick Green either.
Yeah. But he has the same attitude. Only things have jumped up a few hundred years to where, the Victorian literary movement is garbage. It won't compare to the golden age of the Elizabethan poets.
Shakespeare and Byron and
yeah.
I mean, to be fair, I do much prefer that era, but that's not to say the Victorian one isn't without merit.
Yeah.
If only because Lady Chatterley.
On that trope,
though. Also in the Victorian era, we do get the dawn of sci-fi. So.
Yeah.
But this time when she hands her manuscript of, over to Nick Green, instead of immediately trashing it, he declares it a masterpiece.
Because it's had time to mature.
And says, we've got to get this published immediately. Yeah. And then Orlando discovers the bookstore.
Yeah.
Yes. Then Orlando discovers the bookstore and spends a small fortune buying all the books that the bookstore owner can recommend as being great works.
I said it at the start of the stream, and I'm going to say it again. It's me.
But then she realized that the great Victorian works aren't all what they're cracked up to be.
I mean, yeah, they're okay, but
I don't think she dumps down on everything. It's more like, that there's good and bad stuff everywhere, and people can be published without being good. It was also one of the images I got from that.
Yeah.
So how can you find what's good in amongst this sea of too much? That's an even worse trope now than it was then.
Yeah.
Well, and earlier in the, Virginia Woolf did say Tennyson was like the last genius.
So as we put it, the ladies have returned and truth has left.
Yeah.
Is kind of what's going on here, isn't it? Because in the era of Victorian social mores where chastity and virginity and all that were the height of ideal, the truth didn't matter. But in Orlando's time where truth mattered and those things were cast aside, that's where the geniuses lived.
And of course, Orlando is also straining against, the idea of, get pregnant, pump out babies.
I can identify with that.
Yeah. You!
Orlando never actually does.
Actually, no. Orlando does have, not in the Victorian era,
but did have three sons who were later declared illegitimate.
No, Orlando did give birth to a son.
Did I miss that bit?
It's literally just a line where, like, during one of those speed forward sections, she's handed a newborn baby, and
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's so easy to miss that bit.
Yeah.
Isn't the hint with the illegitimate sons though that might not even be Orlando's because of the way the court cases go and stuff?
Oh yeah, the court cases found that
Listen, there is not a man alive who hasn't tried the "how do I know they're mine" defense to get out of child support.
Yeah, but so the court cases finally finish after 200 years.
Bureaucracy, people.
And it had been found that Orlando is alive. Orlando is a woman. And the sons are not legitimate.
Yeah. The Turkish marriages are null. The children pronounced illegitimate. Orlando's sex declared, quote, female beyond all doubt.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now in full claim of all titles and property. But, a 200-year-old lawsuit's quite expensive.
Yeah.
Has almost no money left at the end of this.
Yeah. And there's this important point of Marmaduke Shell, who's known as Shell throughout, then starts to get invitations from the high society in the urban set and declines them to stay with Shell.
Yeah.
So suddenly, this is that urban-rural thing going on of... you get the impression that Orlando has grown from being a generic city person to being someone who finds emotional nourishment in just being with the one person who understands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which feeds into this whole soulmates trope.
And then, we get another kind of jarring time jump when so we got a jarring time jump when she went to go back to London with her manuscript, and it's like, oh, that we'll make it right in time for the 11:45 train.
Yeah.
And then we get another jarring time jump when
taking the train before. She's like, what?
Yeah, we get another jarring time jump when she's mooning in her townhouse and looks out the window and there's a motor car just driving past.
Yeah. Technology moves, time continues and moves on.
Yeah.
And through all of this, despite being 300 or 400 years old, Orlando is still 30.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Orlando gets in the car to go do the shopping.
At the end of the book, Orlando is declaring herself as being 36, isn't it?
Yeah.
So late 30s.
Yeah. Although there's something I want to point out about Orlando and Shell's relationship.
Yeah.
Orlando never wanted to be married.
Yeah.
And then marries someone who they're then forced to be long distance with for fuck knows how long.
Years.
And it's.
Are you saying it you again?
Well, no, because I want you to be with me. I didn't just marry you because you live halfway around the world, but kind of, yeah. By circumstances beyond my control, yeah.
My train of thought just derailed.
And the thing is, this is the point that these two people, no matter how far apart they are so in love that it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Though, to be honest, if you're essentially immortal, which is kind of what they both are, does that matter? Does 50 years matter here or there?
No. Go, sail the world, enjoy. Come back when you're ready.
Yeah.
Come back when
Dinner's
you're ready.
at 3.
I'll still be here.
So, like, you know.
But yeah, the thing
immortal.
is, you know, they get married, and obviously Shell, you know, does return and, you know, and visit often, or else how did she get pregnant?
Yeah, it's it's a bit, again, I've referenced Pirates of the Caribbean in this stream, but it's very Turner, isn't it? Will Turner, and
but
it's that going on.
Yeah, but you know, but basically how the narrative of the book goes is they get married, he fucks off and is out and gone and doesn't actually come back until the book ends with him coming back.
Mm.
Oh, and also her the oak tree won a bunch of awards.
Yeah. So basically she got everything she wanted out of life. She just had to wait like 500 years.
Yeah.
500 years, yeah.
And literally that's how that, like, after all the buildup of her writing the oak tree, that's how it's handled in the book. It's like, oh yeah, she won a bunch of awards for the oak tree too.
Yeah.
Well, the oak tree is probably what fixed the finances for, if you think about it.
Yeah. Oh yes, you know, 7 editions plus 200 Guinea award.
Mm.
Yeah,
it's more than enough too.
I think the point of that was it being done like that at the end. The point was that to her, once she'd finished writing it and the book needed to be read, it was less important to her at that point.
Yeah, like anyone who's a writer and has that instinct to write will know it's not how people receive it necessarily that matters. It's that you produce it and that it's put out there.
And so
someone told you no one's ever going to read your book, you would still have the urge to write it.
And so she goes shopping and gets like hit with like heavy flashbacks.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
And then
Sasha.
Yeah.
And then there's Sasha.
There's Sasha.
Yeah.
That is it, Sasha, or is she just thinking it's Sasha because there's some memory that?
Yeah, because someone lit a candle.
Yeah, someone lit a candle, and the smell evoked the memory of Sasha. So was this Sasha or not?
Yeah. Am I the only one who got kind of Dallas vibes from this entire book with that ending of was it all a dream?
Yeah.
Was it all a flashback?
And so during these like heavy flashbacks, Orlando feels like she's losing herself. And so she goes for a drive and trying to look to find herself. And then she finds herself when she arrives at her estate.
Yeah. She comes home to her rural environment, to her fixed point in time, to the place where she retreats to when the world becomes too much to cope with.
And
repeated motif with that throughout the text.
And then spends a few pages wallowing in the history of the place. That's like, and how kings and such won't be using these bedrooms again.
Mm.
And then Marmaduke Shell shows back up and the book ends.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I think once Orlando and Shell have used those bedrooms, would kings and queens want to? Because I'm sorry, 50 years at sea.
Yeah.
Those two have got needs. You know, that's.
Yeah.
Especially once they develop a UV light. I mean, no one's going to sleep.
Mm. Plus, 1920s. By the time Shell gets back, let's say late 20s, they've only got a couple of decades to wait till birth control.
Well, it ends at it ends in the mid 1930s.
So right on the advent of early birth control and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I think it is very telling that it doesn't go into the Second World War.
Yeah.
Doesn't go into the Second World War either.
It doesn't. And those two wars are pretty unilaterally agreed by historians to have been the major catalyst for the fall of imperialism.
Yeah.
Like formal imperialism.
The book was written before the second.
Mm.
So she couldn't.
But the fact that it doesn't go into the first is very telling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially as 1920s, right on the end of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a point there that she probably didn't see it in that same light at the time. So the relevance for it wasn't there for her, especially in the story she was trying to tell.
I think as well there's a point to be made that when you're immortal, put like trifling things like wars that last half a decade and not what you're focusing on.
Yeah, because the only it does mention that she hears guns.
Yeah.
Around that time, but she like her mind is brought back to Nelson and the Spanish Armada.
Exactly. So again, it's this war is part of the cycle of life.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they talk about the war in Constantinople.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, she sleeps through it.
Yeah.
It's like...
Exactly, and this is something that war doesn't touch her. Great sweeping changes don't touch her because she lives through them all. It's this sense of the sun will rise, the sun will set, life goes on.
Yeah.
And she's more interested in the personal things that she has within her world than these other extraneous things which don't matter to her.
And also, be queer, be immortal.
Yeah.
Yes. Be queer, be immortal.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that's a good note to end on.
Yeah.
It is.
Be queer, be immortal, survive 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I've just decided I want a mask with the words cough, cough. I swear it's not COVID.
I'll get on that. Also, okay, so we have actually 3 products from this stream that I need to make.
Yes, we have cough, cough. I swear it's not COVID.
That Virginia Woolf quote.
Mm-hmm.
And then be queer, be immortal.
I want that on a mask.
Yeah.
T-shirt.
Yeah. So coming. So keep an eye on my Teespring.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, we'll move into shilling. I have a Teespring. I have a Patreon. Keep an eye on both of them. As always, next Saturday, Secular D&D, where the party puzzles through a puzzling maze.
We should have got some thread when we set off into the maze.
You do.
No, but we didn't lay down a thread.
Yeah.
As we were moving, we should have done that. The Minotaur should have been a clue to do that.
Yeah. Also, I'm thinking next week on Media Musings, given how the Asterix stream looks like it'll be going next week, I'm thinking next week will be a good week to discuss comic books.
Cool.
Oh, that sounds good. If you're going to do that, I'll talk to you about that afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, Jen.
Yeah, you guys all know who I am, Jen from Jen's Little Corner. Yeah, I don't know what I've got happening this week because, as you can see, I'm still away, still in the process of organizing the new house shifting to. So, when I get back, there'll probably be a Stump Jen stream, and I will be at some point doing a stream on maths and stuff that I'll be doing with another mathematician. Well, somebody who's better qualified at maths than me. And a couple of other people, so that should be interesting.
Miss, I don't feel well. Can I go to the nurse's office? I don't want to do maths.
So that'll be happening at some point. But yeah, that's pretty much.
Yep, and
cool. Couple of things. In an hour on Sit Down with Debunkers, I am on Equality, and we're talking human rights in different countries. So check that out. That's in about an hour or so. I have a coffee. If you'd like, you can buy me a coffee, or I'm looking to start commissions and things. Keep an eye on it. It's very new. I only started it like yesterday. Keep an eye on it. I'll be doing commissions for different things. So, you will get something for your money. Probably digital products, photomanic, things like that, most likely, or short stories, commissions, things like that. I'm on Twitter, Danger Hissy. I do the Asterix and Obelix stream with Godless Scummer on a Sunday right before Media Musings. And if you find my Twitter, and my main is Danger Hissy, if you find my fandom Twitter, Discourse Noodle, Dead Dove Do Not Eat, it's definitely not safe for work.
Yeah.
That also goes for my fan fictions, unless you commissioned one and you want it safe for work, in which case, cool.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Yep.
So about your fanfics, how about Orlando and Shell discovering BDSM?
You may be a bit late to the party.
But anyways, let's move to taglines.
Take care, be good, and if you can't be good, be careful. Always use a safe word.
And remember, indoctrination is a hell of a selfie stick, so don't choke on it. And in special light of this stream, be queer, be immortal.
Yeah. Bye.